As I mentioned before, today's the first Sunday of Lent. We've already begun our Lenten journey here with our Ash Wednesday service, which was a very powerful service. If you missed it, you really missed out. It was really good. Today, we begin a new leg of our journey through Matthew, a journey that is going to take us to the cross and then through the cross. I want to start by inviting you to travel with us on the road back to God. As we are now in the season of Lent, we are called by God to return to Him. Not just to give up, physical things here on earth, not just to give up, sweets or meat or anything else. Not just to improve on a few things in our spiritual lives, but to turn from self, to accept the call, and to respond to the invitation from God to return to Him. Now, as we examine our text today, we see this issuance of an invitation. In this context, it is an invitation to a wedding party for the king's son. Now, before we get into the thick of it, we need to get a firm grip on what an invitation is. Because I believe in our culture, we generally take invitations very lightly, right? So what is an invitation? An invitation is, something that you're sent. It's a request for your presence at a particular, event. So now typically, unless it's a family member or a friend or, a child, grandchild or whatever, some of us receive like this wedding invitations that cause a certain response. And it usually looks, something like this. You get it out of the mail and, good grief, another wedding. That means I have to buy something. Oh, look, it's in the fall too. Yeah, real original, real, cliche. Another fall wedding and oh, you can put in your order for the meal. Chicken or fish? Well, there's no steak? What is this, a vegetarian wedding? Good night. I don't know. I might have to find a way to get out of this one. We'll see. It usually looks something like that, right? Is that really, anybody relate to that? I mean, let's be honest. Sometimes they make the refrigerator door and sometimes they don't. The point is that you've been invited. You've been invited. You have been chosen to attend. Someone thought of you when they could have picked someone else. Someone requested you specifically because they like you and they want you to be there. So now that we have a good working definition of what an invitation is and what it really means, we can now look at our text and we can see how those that the king invited to the wedding banquet, how they responded. And we see in verse 3, they refused to come. That was their response. And so here's the thing, an invitation requires a response. Don't miss that part. The response sends a message back to the inviter. If you look at a wedding invitation that you receive, you'll see a little line with a request to please RSVP, right? In other words, I want to know if you're coming or not. To take it further, when you do not RSVP, you are still sending a message. You're saying that, responding back to your request for my presence isn't even worth my time. It's like those in the text here who were invited, except they didn't just snub the king and his son, they flat out refused. It wasn't just a check, no, I can't make it because I have something else. Absolutely not. I refuse. Then after being turned down, he sends out another invitation. He tries to win them over by letting them know that many preparations have been made, right? It says he has butchered his oxen and cattle, which he's been fattening up. Fattening up, cattle and oxen, that takes time. He could have been working on this, probably all year, but he says all is now ready. Come to the banquet. He's gone through the trouble of making all of these preparations, so come on, come, and still nothing. In fact, they paid no attention. They just went on with their day, carried out their business. Let's talk about preparations for a minute because, I'm sure most of us have been here before, okay? And if you haven't, it's very, 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 very frustrating. For example, you invite a bunch of people over, for dinner, right? Friends, family. You put all of your effort into making everything just right. Right? Perhaps you go to the grocery store. It takes time. You get everything you need. It takes time to cook, bake, grill, whatever. You set the table out. You put on a nice, tablecloth. You don't use like the paper plates and paper towels, You use the good stuff, the fine china, the stuff that stays in the curio cabinet all year. Maybe you roll those nice napkins that you have, put it on a plate. Put the silverware out, right? Nice candles. I'm really painting a picture of a really nice dinner here. It may not look like that in your house. I don't know, or mine. But whatever it looks like, this point is that, you took time to prepare it. And nobody shows up. All right, you're waiting. You're waiting. You're keeping the food warm. You're stirring things, making little adjustments. Gets to the point to where you make a phone call and ask if they're on their way. Are you coming? Where are you? Imagine being in the shoes of the king that if, when you call, they completely ignore you. You ever been there? See, people that have never been on the preparation side, they don't understand all that it takes, all that someone has gone through to make sure all is now ready. They don't get it. So we could even apply that to our churches, today. There's a lot of preparation that takes place to put all of the elements of a service together, to be able to be here and to do what we do. It doesn't all just come together. It doesn't happen organically. A lot of work, practice, study, and meetings happen before Sunday hits. But imagine all of that just to be snubbed. If you guys snubbed me this morning by not showing up just because you have better things to do, I'd be heartbroken. Imagine how God feels, though, when we do that to him. Imagine how the king and his son felt. Right? This was his son's wedding day. And on top of that, it gets worse. After the king sent out the second invitation, some of his servants who brought the message were killed. It brings a new understanding to the expression, don't shoot the messenger. So the king is so enraged that the people killed the messengers, that he killed them and burned their cities. And he says, the banquet is still ready, but since they refused, they don't deserve to partake. So the king sends out yet another, a third invitation. But this time, it's different. He opens it up to whoever, anybody who has ears to hear, whoever, responds to the invitation. Does this sound like the gospel to you? Right? God has made all things ready. This is not self-serve, okay? This isn't a wedding party with an open buffet, an open bar. He's made all the preparations necessary to be able to come. He has sent out the invitations. He has provided and killed the sacrifice. He has set the scene. The doors are open wide for people to enter. They don't have to do anything but accept the invitation to come. But there is one thing that those who are invited must do along the way as they come. And that is, they have to dress appropriately for the wedding. Right now, in our culture, we've gotten to the point, where we do different weddings, because typically you dress up for a wedding, and sometimes it's different. We have a laid-back wedding, or it's thematic, or whatever, and all that's fine. But in Jesus' day, weddings were a big deal. They were like a week long, like 5 to 7 days. Paige, could you imagine planning for a 5 to 7 day wedding? Insane. And usually in the fall, because that is when the harvest was, and there was enough food and drink to go around, right? And so, but in a Hebrew wedding, it was customary and even mandated that you come dressed appropriately. Okay, in some cultures, the king would even provide robes for all the guests. There isn't much evidence of that happening in Israel in those days, but the custom remained, you come in your wedding clothes. Now, as we look back at our text, we see that the people understood that custom. They knew that it was likely that the king would be looking over the room to make sure that everyone was dressed right. This was a celebration. He wanted to be the one to make sure that everything was just right for his son. Big deal. It says in verses 11 and 12 that, he noticed a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. He asked him, how did you get in here without wedding clothes, friend? And the man was speechless. He was caught. Dead in the water. See, the man didn't have on the proper wedding attire, and he knew it. It wasn't a surprise to him. I mean, what did he think the king wouldn't notice, right? Like maybe he thought he could just blend in with the crowd, but instead, he stood out, right? He was out of place. We know the feeling, right? The feeling of being underdressed. You feel like everyone's looking at you. It makes you wonder, what might be going through this guy's mind as you read this. And as he comes into the banquet hall, he knows the custom. He just doesn't care enough to follow it. See, he accepts the invitation, but he doesn't accept everything that comes with it. Oh, he'll take the good stuff. He'll eat the meat, right? He'll drink the wine, but he doesn't care enough to clean up and put his wedding clothes on for the occasion. This displays a careless attitude towards the king and towards the son. It shows that he doesn't care enough for them to do what is asked. It isn't important enough for him to be proper and cleaned up. Now let me ask you again. Is this not the gospel? This is the gospel. God provided the sacrifice of his son Jesus. And there is a cost to providing. There is a cost. Just like when you go to the store and get what you need for your special dinner, it costs money. It costs you time. Right? In God's case, he had the sacrifice killed on your behalf. And it cost him his son. He made all the preparations. All you need to do is accept the invitation and wear the proper garments. Am I talking to somebody today? Open your eyes, open your ears, open your hearts, open your hands, and receive it, and put on the garment of Christ. God has opened his invitation to Jew and to Gentile. Right? We read that in the scriptures, that many of the Jews in Jesus' day, and even today, they refuse the gospel of Jesus Christ. They don't want it. They turn their heads away from it like a child, turning away from the hand with the spoon. The truth is that many Gentiles do the same. Right? They would rather eat something that suits their palate better. Something that goes down smoothly. Something that doesn't taste bad once it hits the tongue. That's the gospel. Many people don't like it because it reveals things about us that need to change. It causes us to become aware of our shortcomings. It causes us to become aware of our sins, to be aware of our imperfections, to be aware of our pride, to be aware of our needs. We feel guilt and shame, and we don't like to feel guilt and shame. We don't want to feel that. We want to justify our actions, right? We want to live the way that we want. We want to say things like, I'm a grown man. I'm going to do whatever I want to do and live how I want to live. Now, let me tell you something. Real men, real grown men, do what the Father wants. That's a real man. Real women, they put the Lord first. They honor their God. Am I talking to anybody today? I can't hear somebody. It causes us to think about all these things. We don't like to be convicted of our sin and suffering because that means we have to change. We're wearing the wrong garments. We are wearing the tattered, torn, the worn-out clothes of the world. Right? We need to cast those things out into the outer darkness and put on robes of white, bright and clean before our Lord. Excuse me. Jesus gives a warning through this parable in verses 13 and 14. After the king noticed the man wearing the wrong clothes and convicting him of it, he told the attendants, tie him hand and foot and bind him and throw him outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, for many are invited, but few are chosen. Jesus gives the audience a visual of hell here. He gives us, the visual of eternal separation from the Father. To be thrown outside into the darkness in this time means that it was very dark. Okay, let's think about this. They didn't have street lights back then, okay? There was no lamp posts. Everything was lit by oil and flame. Darkness was feared. And in this case, he's bound and he's thrown into outer darkness where he cannot escape, where he does not have access to the freedom that he once had, where thief and robber can come and rob him of all of his possessions, perhaps even his life, for he has disrespected the king and his son. The idea is separation from the celebration. Okay, the worst thing that could ever happen for any of us at the end of our lives would be to be eternally separated from the Father, from the presence of God. It's not going to be pretty. It's not pretty here on earth even when we live our lives apart from God, and many don't realize it, but it's a tough life. That may sound, contradictory, but, there are many people who are searching for a solution to their problems, and they continue to turn to the wrong things instead of turning to God. Even those who feel like they're living the sweet life and enjoying all of their freedoms, living for their own desires, for their own flesh, there's a dark future ahead. But they need to know the truth. Who's going to tell them? They need to have the invitation extended to them, right? They don't realize they are headed for destruction, darkness, eternal separation from God. Maybe I'm talking to you today. Maybe you have never really accepted God's invitation, really. And maybe you have even identified as being a follower of Christ, but have never really made that proclamation, that profession of Christ. I don't know. I just know I'm speaking to somebody today. Maybe you feel that separation right now. Maybe you feel like you're in the outer darkness wearing the wrong clothes. I'm reading the book of Job again in my personal Bible study. And again, I'm just marveling at the anguish that Job was in when he was going through his trials. And he was, questioning God and thinking that God was punishing him for something. Job was the richest and the most righteous person, in his time, but he lost everything. Many of you know the story, but if you don't know the story, in an instant, Job lost children, he lost livestock, he lost his health. Right? He had been decimated to sitting in ashes, scraping his skin with broken pottery because he was covered in boils and in sores. Not from his own doing, not because of his sin, but because he was being tested. God allowed the enemy to test him. But see, Job never cursed God during this tribulation. But just the feeling of being punished and being separated from God literally made him want to die. Do we take our relationship with God that seriously? Do we understand that if we don't accept the invitation to come, that outer darkness, eternal separation, weeping and gnashing of teeth, It's in our future. Again, maybe you're there right now. I don't know, but the good news is you're here today. You're here today. Not that you must be in a church to accept the call to follow Christ. Not that you must be in a church to make him Lord of your life. You can do that anywhere. But he allowed you to be here today. To hear this message, which is for you. I didn't write it. He did. I'm just a messenger. So are you going to kill the messenger? Or will you accept the invitation? I believe that you're here today for such a time as this. Do you know that God ordained you to be here today? He made plans, preparations for you to be here. He made sure that you woke up this morning. Right? He allowed the body to move and to work the way that he designed it to so that you could get yourself ready or you could have the aid of somebody else to help you get ready. He made sure that, the car started, you didn't have a dead battery, a flat tire. Maybe you did, I don't know, but you got here, right? He made sure nothing worse happened. He made sure that, you didn't get involved in an accident on the way, that, the drunk driver, the impaired driver, the distracted driver, the inexperienced driver, that he didn't slam into you. Or that the snowy and icy road conditions didn't cause you to end up in a ditch. He wanted you to get here safely. He prepared you to be a guest at his banquet today. Today. See, we don't typically think about all the things that have to come together and work just right, just for us to be present here. Because the reality is that there's an enemy who is working against all of those preparations and provisions of God to try to make sure that you don't make it. That's the reality. But God prepared for that too. He prepared an encampment of angels to surround you and to protect you. Not that the attacks of Satan don't ever reach us, not that they don't come our way, but that he can dispatch the armies of heaven when we pray and we call upon his name. For he makes all things work together for what? For our good. All is now ready. Jesus said in John chapter 14, verses 2 through 4, he said, "My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I'm going to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going." You might be like me. I have read these verses over and over and over and over again. I've heard them all of my Christian life. These very verses. And I've always read it with the understanding that Jesus was saying that after his ascension, that he would go to prepare a place for us in heaven. In my study, God revealed it to me differently. Because that's not really what he was saying. Okay, don't miss this. What he was saying was, and I might challenge your tradition of thinking on this, and that's okay. But what he was saying was, I am going to the cross. I am going to the cross to prepare the way for you to enter the kingdom. Now, in the same chapter in verse 6, he says, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." See, the kingdom is his Father's house, the one that has many rooms. Some translations use the word mansions, but a better translation of that word is actually room or dwelling place, right? Where we will dwell with him and he will dwell with us. But you see, the Father's house has many rooms in it, because the kingdom is designed for everyone to enter in, but all do not accept the invitation to the way. Does that make sense? Do you see it? You've also heard this before. Matthew 7, verses 13 and 14, it says, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate, and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. So why is that? Why only a few? Because not everyone will accept the invitation to the way, and Jesus and the Father, who are one, they knew that. What it should be is wide and broad is the gate that leads to life. It's a narrow way because people don't want to accept that way for their life. That's why it's narrow. It's too narrow for them, right? They have to change some things. They have to submit to the Father and to the Son. But the way is wide enough for the entire world. And this is not an Arminian and Calvin, discussion. But it's for everyone. If everyone would accept the invitation. Instead of worrying about how limited it sounds to have only one way, man, we should be thanking God for preparing and providing a way at all. At all. I mean, after all, we deserve to be given the direction to destruction. But instead, we were invited to life. So let me ask you, have you made your reservation? You must RSVP to enter the kingdom. And you must be wearing the proper wedding clothes, the garments of Christ. Are you ready to quit trying to pull a fast one on the king? Trying to blend in and then leave unnoticed? Are you ready to stop trying to consume all the good tasting things while refusing to accept the things that don't taste as good? Are you ready to submit your life through obedience to his call and to honor the king and his son? Let us make this Lent different. Instead of just giving something up, perhaps you need to put something on. The garment of Christ. The righteousness of Christ. Not our own righteousness, his. That's what it's all about. Recognizing our need for him. Have you made your reservation?